I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. We are going to go ahead and start with a warning for this episode. You may hear some unfamiliar background noise. It's because we are filming in an unusual location.
Well, we're not filming.
Sorry, recording. In an unusual location, and I am dog sitting 3 dogs. So they're not my dogs, they're different dogs. And so if you hear some doggy sounds in the background, we apologize in advance. So this is our 2021 wrap-up episode, though, where we're going to talk about our tops of 2021 of various media formats.
There's some imbalance to this because we put together lists that and not necessarily the same format as each other did. So there'll be periods where each of us have more or less to say than the other.
Well, and part of that is due to the fact that, as per usual, I have not seen nearly as many new releases as Nate did this year. So Nate has a more complete and longer list of his top movies of the year than I do, just by virtue of he's seen more movies. So while Nate is going to be doing his top 10 movies of 2021, I'm going to limit myself to my top 5. So, but we're going to go ahead and have Nate start off with his top 10 movies, ranking from bottom up, right? From 10 towards 10. 1.
And then after we get through 6, we'll all start to alternate.
Yeah.
As we both done at least top 5. So for 2021, and I thought this was going to be higher on the list than it ended up being. My number 10 film of the year is Don't Look Up.
Yeah. That's on my list, though it's tied for 5th place.
Tied for 5th place. All right. So Don't Look Up, I actually did see this one in the theater. I was the only one in my showing when I saw it. It's a satire. It's by Adam McKay, who did Vice, the Dick Cheney movie, and
The
did
Big Short.
And also did really more traditional comedies before that. And this is more of a traditional comedy, but it's got a really kind of dark, satirical bite to it. It's a metaphor for environmentalism and impending climate crisis, but it can also work for COVID or any number of things. It is about
also the political situation
situation in the United States and how bad it is. And I had commented before, and also on my review of the film that I put on my blog, there was a movie that came out in 2006 called American Dreams, which was about a George W. Bush-like president doing a guest host on an American Idol type show, and there is a Muslim sleeper agent, a terrorist sleeper agent assigned to kill him. And that film was about our messed up foreign policy and our ineffectual leadership and our silly reality shows and the state of America at that time. I think it really captured 2006 well. This film, 15 years later, captures 2021 very well. And while the first movie made me a little nauseous, this movie made me want to throw up. Because I think we are in a place where we'd let the comet hit. It's about efforts to stop a comet, and the political structure is just so dysfunctional that even though technologically it seems to be within our grasp to stop the comet, as a people we just can't quite pull that off.
Yeah, including aborting a launch which is estimated to have an 81% chance of success because it's discovered that there's some potential to mine the comet for precious metals. Yeah. It is very.
It's a little bit mean. It's really.
I've had trouble placing my finger on what it is about this movie that doesn't make it better in my opinion, because I really liked Adam McKay's earlier films, especially The Big Short, and he's done social commentary before, and this one seems more fatalistic. It seems more, like you said, a little bit mean-spirited. But it's also at the same time so on point.
Yeah.
And,
It's been commented that, are we beyond satire now? I mean, just the state of things. And so there's no subtlety to it. It's like for this subject matter, he has to hit it with a hammer.
He has to club you over the head. And I think that's part of the problem with this is the fact that is the lack of subtlety. And I think that is part of the problem. As we've talked about it, I've referenced some certain choices that were made that seem as though they were made to make the hypocrisy or the craziness of it stand out even more, and that's also what detracts from the film.
Well, his plea is that we need to get over ourselves and focus more on reality, but because it is presented in a pretty partisan way, and I think not without a point on that. But because of the way it's presented, this plea for people to get on the same page cannot have that effect.
Yeah.
Because it is so demonizing to one side.
Yeah.
Not that it lets the left off completely.
No, not at all.
But it's not. I mean, it's not. It's not going to the jugular. It's saying the left has got this. They're not taking things as seriously as they should, and they've got this kind of inane celebrity culture that's kind of stupid.
Yeah.
But they're not threatening the survival of the species.
Yeah.
Or the planet.
Planetary extinction level events. Yeah.
So yeah, it's very much a film of its time. It really worked for me. I did see it a second time, and it doesn't have the same impact after the original viewing. But it's number 10.
I think it also suffers a little bit from when it was released. A December release for such a fatalistic movie doesn't seem like the best timing.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Hey, number 9 is Spencer.
I did not see this one.
This is the film about Princess Diana.
Okay.
Whose last name was Spencer. It's by the same Chilean director who did Jackie a few years back. So it covers similar territory. This is set Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day, 1991. Kristen Stewart plays Princess Diana, which at first I wasn't thinking that was great casting, but you know, you get the hair right, you get the makeup right, and she looks eerily like Diana. And it's basically, it's fictional, it's intuited, but we know what happens later on. And so it presents this holiday weekend as the time in which Diana admits to herself that her marriage is not salvageable and that it will eventually end in divorce. And strong performance by Kristen Stewart and the various Windsors and royal hanger-ons all look sufficiently like they should look. Sally Hawkins has a good supporting role in it as well.
Yeah. What's your number 8?
That's number 9. So number 8 is Pig,
which I also have not caught up on.
So Pig,
the Nicolas Cage.
Nicolas Cage. So
although I do hear the Utah Film Critic Association, their recommendation was that he be nominated for an Oscar for Best Actor this year.
Indeed. So Pig is about Nicolas Cage plays a chef. He used to be a very esteemed chef in the Portland area whose wife died under circumstances that are never entirely explained, and he became a hermit. And he lives out in the woods with his truffle-sniffing pig named Pig. And the pig is kidnapped. So he goes back into Portland to try to hunt down his pig with the help of the man who he supplies truffles to. And you get into the underbelly of the foodie scene in Portland, including an underground fight club for food servers. And this whole concept...
Underground fight club for
food servers. Yep, and cooks and stuff, chefs. And it sounds like it is going to be... What's the Keanu Reeves...
John Wick?
John Wick, yeah. Sounds like it's going to be John Wick. But it's not. It does have the Fight Club scene, but it is solemn and reflective and somber and kind of serious. And it's not at all what you think you would get from a movie with this setup. It is a very strong performance by Nicolas Cage, his best in quite some time. So that's number 8. Number 7 is Dune. Did you get around to Dune yet?
I have not watched Dune yet. And I freely admit that I'm lacking motivation. Everything I've kind of heard about Dune basically says it's extremely beautiful, but it doesn't have a lot of soul.
I would completely agree with that. So Dune looks great. It's well cast. It's well written. There was a Sci-Fi Channel one around the turn of the millennium that's well regarded, and then there was the famous David Lynch version from the early mid-80s. And that film because Dune is set thousands of years in the future. David Lynch's Dune kind of took the crazy and amped it up and just went, it's like, let's make this super weird. And this Dune takes weird things and so let's try to play it straight. And so there's certain, like Dune is a planet that has a mineral they need for folding space for traveling between the stars. And it's basically like an occupied, like a Middle Eastern country. And so there's this empire, and so there's the imperialism aspect to it. The set design's beautiful. I felt like it didn't fall into a lot of traps that it might have otherwise fallen into. Like it felt very coherent, like the world was fully realized. But you're right, it does I wanted to be sucked in more emotionally than I was. And these characters are, the good characters are principally kind of members of an elite house. And this is who they are. They're not very emotive people. So they keep things close to the vest. And so that does make it harder to connect with them. So I didn't really love anybody in this, but I have a feeling that with the sequel, maybe I will come to feel more emotionally invested as this progresses.
Yeah.
But it's still, a wonderful looking film.
Let me pick up this one toy that's making all the noise.
Number 6, The Eyes of Tammy Faye.
I have not caught up with this yet.
This is a biopic of Tammy Faye Baker, who was married to Jim Baker.
This is a Warner Brothers film, right?
I believe so.
I'm pretty sure I saw it on HBO Max today, so I might catch up on that in the near future.
They were very famous, televangelist. There was a lot of misappropriations of funds. There was a big financial scandal in the late 80s. And Tammy Faye was really kind of an outrageous-looking woman with heavy makeup. And Jessica Chastain plays her, and they have her under heavy prosthetics. And the shape of Tammy Faye Baker's face is very different than Jessica Chastain's face. And so they changed the shape of her face. And for about the first half hour, I found that super distracting until I got used to it. I really liked it. I thought it was a very solid performance. I was familiar with broad details, broad outline of what happened. But this fleshes it out. It is based on a biopic or a documentary that came out in 2000 with the same title. And so there are moments of Tammy Faye talking to the camera at the beginning. It's kind of a tragic story. I think she at heart was a good Christian person, but she also had an ego, and she really liked being in front of the camera and having the attention. One of the subtexts they used to kind of humanize her is that she was unusually open to the homosexual community for a televangelist in the 1980s, and she did get some pushback for that. And then after the events of this film, she did open up a ministry targeting that group and had good relationships with the homosexual community. So they used that to kind of redeem her.
Yeah.
But she's certainly a mixed bag of a person, and she passed away some years ago from cancer, I believe.
Yeah.
So, top 5.
You want me to do my number 5 first?
Yeah, so we'll alternate.
So my 5 was a tie. I already mentioned Don't Look Up was tied for number 5. The other film tied for my number 5 position was an early 2020 release that we did an episode on, The Little Things.
The Little Things, yes. The Little Thing makes my honorable mentions.
Yeah.
Which I should mention just very briefly. My honorable mentions were The Little Things, Nobody, which is from Better Call Saul.
Oh, I'm blanking on his name.
Bob Odenkirk.
Yeah.
So it's basically a Bob Odenkirk action film I liked it. And then Cruella.
Okay.
And In the Heights and Dig.
Okay.
My honorable mentions. But
then I have a feeling that there will be some others in my top 5 that won't even make your honorable mention list.
Okay.
Specifically, perhaps my number 4, A Quiet Place Part 2.
Okay. We forgot to do my number 5.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
Okay. West Side Story.
Okay.
Which I had
thought that might be a little higher than 5 on your list.
I had mixed feelings about it. I love the original West Side Story. It's arguably that and Singing in the Rain are probably the 2 greatest musicals, or at least in my opinion. This film is much angrier than that film. There is a universality to the story, because basically Romeo and Juliet, isn't it a shame that these 2 nice kids couldn't get together? It's a universal story, star-crossed lovers. But this film presents it as not so much being something that can happen anytime, any place, but being super specific to late 1950s New York, the Puerto Rican Anglo relationships. The sets are not stylized, and sometimes they're almost too realistic for the musical numbers, that something seems kind of off about it. So I did have certain problems with the presentation. They tweaked certain things. They changed one character, made Doc's widow, played by Rita Moreno, who was in the original film, she's like 90 years old, and she can still sing and still act, and she's great. The music pulls it through. I mean, it's still a great story.
And the updates to the music are appropriate?
Yeah, they moved some of the songs around. I think there might have been 1 or 2 songs that they edited out. But, like, it is affecting.
Well, but they also updated lyrics of a couple of the songs.
Yeah, I think they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stand out or anything?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, solid movie. Interesting to think that, so Steven Spielberg's like 75 years old. This is his first musical.
Wow.
So, but
I mean,
he's Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
You're we know he's up to it, but it's interesting to see him, use that muscle in filmmaking, get that in while he can.
Yeah. Well, as I already mentioned, my number 4 is A Quiet Place Part 2.
Solid.
I enjoy that series. It was a well-done sequel-prequel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it.
The sequel-prequel was kind of interesting because they wanted to get Krasinski
in the
back
film briefly.
Yeah.
But he's the director as well. And, yeah.
Though he will not be directing the third and final film.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. I had not heard that yet. Is he going to be in the third?
I wouldn't imagine so.
What about Emily Blunt?
It'd be hard to shoehorn him in. I'm sure Emily Blunt will be in there.
Okay.
I liked it too. I mean, I thought that it...
But it didn't even make your honorable mention.
It didn't even make it, yeah. I mean, that's a 3-star film.
Yeah, I rated it 7 out of 10. No, I rated it 8 out of 10. I liked it a little bit more than you.
All right, so that was your number 4. My number 4... So, and I was talking... Before we recorded, I said I had something to say about this year in film and about this list. So, numbers 4 through 1, to me, felt like a 4-way tie for second place.
Okay.
I didn't feel there was any one movie this year that was like, okay, that's obviously the best movie of the year. But The French Dispatch might have been the funnest time in the theater for me this year.
Okay.
It is...
Benicio del Toro? Or Wes Anderson?
Yeah, so Wes Anderson. It's very visually playful. I'm glad I saw it on a big screen. I really want to see it again. But there were a lot of things you could make out. So in the film, the French, just little things and the set design, and he's so visually playful, and this might be his most visually playful. It goes back and forth between color and black and white, and there's an animated sequence, and it's structured as the final issue of the fictional French Dispatch, which is a magazine that grew out of the weekend supplement of the Liberty, Kansas Gazette. The son of the publisher went to France, didn't really want to take on his familial responsibilities at the newspaper in boring old Kansas, fell in love with France, turned the weekend supplement into a monthly magazine with an international following, and he wrote in his will that when I die, we fold up the magazine, everybody with a subscription gets prorated for the unused term of that. And the publisher is played by Bill Murray, so the film is structured like the final issue of the magazine. There's a life sketch obituary of Bill Murray. There's a little travel log of NUI France, the fictional location. There's a story about a artist played by Del Toro and his muse. There is a story about a student radical in the 1960s. This fake final issue is roughly 1975. I think 1975 is what they say it is. And then there is the last segment, which is about a police commissioner's son's kidnapping. It's just very playful, very visual. I wish I had seen it more than once on the big screen. I was kind of hoping it would make a appearance in the Dollar Theater, but it seems to be a little too niche to get to the local Dollar Theater here. So that's my number 4.
My number 3 could have been interchangeable with my number 4, but because it surprised me, I went with it. And I know Nate has not seen this. It's The Unforgivable, which is a Sandra Bullock film. I forget the name. Let me look up the name of the director. It's directed by Nora Fingscheit, which I'm sure I pronounced incorrectly. But she's a German director, which is part of why she's not known here and why this went direct to Netflix. It stars Sandra Bullock, Viola Davis, and Vincent D'Onofrio. It also has John Bernthal in it. And this just was a surprisingly solid film, especially for a direct-to-Netflix release. If I understand correctly, Sandra Bullock connected with the director because she has a home in Germany and spent some time in Germany. And so that's how they kind of connected. But surprisingly solid film for what it was. It's about a two sisters. The one is older, significantly older than the younger one. How many spoilers do I give here?
It's up to you.
who is put in prison for the killing of the sheriff, and after getting out of prison, the sheriff is there trying to help with the foreclosure on the home, and she's put in prison for the killing of the sheriff. And after she gets out of prison, she's just trying to track down her sister and kind of reconnect with her sister, who's been adopted in a closed adoption. The twist of the story is you find out at the very end that it was the younger sister who shot the sheriff.
Oh my goodness.
But that's not like even, that's not even like the...
That's not even the point.
No. But, as an older sister, she took the blame, not wanting her sister to get, deal with that. And anyways, surprisingly solid film. I would actually recommend that you catch up with that one at some point.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that was your number 3?
Yes.
All right, so my number 3 is The Card Counter.
Okay.
Which is by Paul Schrader, who did First Reformed. Which was a favorite of mine a few years back. This is a film that I was looking one weekend to see something in the Dollar Theater, and I didn't know anything about this, and it's like written and directed by Paul Schrader. I'm like, I'm going to go see it. And so an hour after I kind of learned it was a thing, I went and saw it, and it is about Oscar Isaacs was in a military prison for his role in the Abu Ghraib prison torture scandal. And while he was in prison, he taught himself how to count cards. So when he gets out, he kind of makes a circuit to casinos, and he realizes, if you don't overdo it, they don't care. So he travels around cheating at cards, and he encounters a young man, because he kind of follows conventions around, because that's where you have a lot of action at the casinos, and he goes to this military convention, and the guy that was his commanding officer in Iraq is giving a lecture. And he's kind of sitting in the back, and there's this young kid is looking at him and recognizes his face, knows who he is. And so afterwards, this guy's probably in his early 20s, he kind of makes contact with him. And they find out that this kid's father was also at Abu Ghraib and also went to prison, and then eventually committed suicide because of what had happened, and was really rough on his mother. And this kid wants to get the commanding officer, played by Willem Dafoe, and torture him and kill him for what he did. And Oscar Isaac's like, not a good idea, kid. You shouldn't do that. And he kind of takes the kid under his wing with the plan to try to set him straight, and eventually realizes, I need to get a bunch of money so we can pay off this kid's debts, get him back into college, and try to kind of force him to reconcile with his mother. And it's his plan on doing that, but it's Paul Schrader film, so it's going to get complicated. I was surprised and really, really pleased with this film.
How does your overall opinion of this compare to First Reformed? I mean, obviously they're
very comparable.
Yeah?
Yeah, I would... So First Reformed was a mixture of the storyline of Taxi Driver and the storyline of Winter Light, which is a Bergman film. This felt newer to me. This didn't feel like it was like, in theory, stitching together two stories like that shouldn't work, but totally worked in First Reform. And this felt like it was more its own thing than it did. So, in a way, I'd have to say it's better.
Okay.
Even though the other one, they're very comparable. They're very comparable, put it this way.
Yeah. My top two, you might consider to some extent a cop-out, but I'm surprised that my top two have not appeared on your list at all, and I'm curious. I'm assuming that if they haven't appeared on your list at this point, they won't. So my number 2 is Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Okay. And you know what? The Card Counter was my number 2.
Oh, was it? What was your number 3?
My number 3 is Last Night in Soho, which is an Edgar Wright film that takes this kind of early 60s kind of genre of psychological horror. There's some Carnival of Souls in there. There's some Repulsion in there. There's some Peeping Tom in there. And it's about Thomasin McKenzie travels. She has a history of mental illness in her family, and her mother committed suicide, and she grew up with her grandmother, and she's on medications, and they're like, there's some risk to having her go out on her own, but she loves fashion. She gets accepted to the London School of Design. She goes there. She has a problem with her roommate. They just totally clash, so she decides she has to get housing off campus, and she rents a room from Diana Rigg in her final film performance. And she starts having these very vivid dreams that take her back into the 1960s, where she becomes Anna Taylor-Joy. So Anna Taylor-Joy is walking around, but in the mirror you can see Thomasin McKenzie, and follows her. She's an aspiring singer who eventually appears to be murdered.
Yeah.
And so she decides that she needs to solve the murder, and she thinks she's seen the guy that did it is still alive. But she also has this history of mental condition, and is it real, is it not? Anyway, I thought that really worked.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
Yeah. Fun.
That was my number 3. So now we'll talk about your number 2, which was Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Didn't even make your honorable mention
Didn't even
list.
make my honorable mentions. It's a 3-star movie.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
I liked it. It's the best Ghostbusters movie since 1984 Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
It's better than Ghostbusters 2, and it's way better than the
More
reboot.
recent, yeah. Yeah, again, this likely is only in the position it is on my list because of the lack of 2021 titles that I've seen. So
It's fun. I liked that they mixed it up just enough. I mean, there was a lot of fan service, and there's a lot of callbacks, maybe too many callbacks. I was kind of distracted by the score. They just kept invoking the original score, which is a great score, but it felt a little forced. I did like that they took it from the city into the country. I like the small town Oklahoma. I like that all of the kids had a rough analog in a Ghostbuster from the original film. I like that it was Jason Reitman, the son of the original director, who has some cred here. You know, this is the family business in a way.
Yeah.
I really quite enjoyed it, but it's 3-star film. I had some issues with the ending. I think you said you also had some issues with the way they ended it.
Yeah.
But on the whole,
again, I recognize that it likely only takes that position on my list because of the lack of titles I saw. So, number 1. Are we ready for this?
Uh-huh.
Another title that has not made your list even in an honorable mention position, No Time to Die.
Okay.
Which means I also know what Nate's number 1 is going to be. But my number 1 was No Time to Die. It was a solid film. It was a good wrap-up for the Daniel Craig James Bond movies. Again, likely only holds a position high on my list because of the lack of 2021 titles I've seen.
So this is Bond number 25, and we had floated the idea of maybe ranking all the Bonds. And I was like, I'm pulled back from that because that's an intimidating prospect. But ranking them by Bond, I'm comfortable with doing. And out of the Daniel Craig, this is number 3 of the 5. It was kind of in the middle of the pack. I like some of the way it wrapped things up. I like the Ana de Armas cameo quite a bit. It was fun. It was kind of dark. I felt at the end of it, it's like I'm really ready for a tone change. Like I've liked what they've done with the Daniel Craig ones, and one of the wonderful things about the Bond films is that they date and that they are so representative of the times that they're made. But I am really ready for a lighter tone.
Yeah.
I really hope that they do something different with these next ones. I kind of don't think they will, but I would like to see.
It depends on who gets cast as the next Bond, but I appreciated the way that they wrapped up the Bond, or the Daniel Craig Bonds.
And all the Easter eggs.
Yeah.
There's so many Bond Easter eggs. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, so I thought it was...
That was the best film for you of the year that you saw? The one you enjoyed the most?
Of the ones that I saw,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We can go through some of... We can, after in the post, I'll go through the list of some of the others that I saw. But yeah, I really didn't see that many 2021 releases this year. So,
my favorite film of the year, Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza.
Yep.
I love Paul Thomas Anderson.
This is another film that I'm lacking motivation to see.
Uh-huh.
And as we have discussed this at length, it's largely due to his last film, Phantom Thread.
Which I also loved.
Yes.
In fact, it was funny because we were talking about this a few nights ago, and you were like, you just love whatever he does. And I'm like, well, I have one film left to see in the canon, and I watched that the other night, Magnolia, and I'm like, I didn't like this. And that could be its whole spiel.
But basically anything modern that he does.
Yeah. This, I mean, it's episodic. It's set in 1970s. I compare it to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is Quentin Tarantino talking about he grew up in California in the late 60s, and this is stuff of his early memories. And Paul Thomas Anderson grew up in Encino, California in the 1970s. So it's about a kid played by Cooper Hoffman, who is Philip Seymour Hoffman's son, who was a frequent collaborator of Paul Thomas Anderson, and he is a child actor who is starting to age out of peak castability. And he's at his first day of the school year getting his picture taken, and one of the people working, he's 15, is this 25-year-old girl played by Alana Haim, who's like an indie rock musician in real life. And he's just instantly smitten. And so he's coming up with ways to spend more time with her, anything from chaperoning him on a publicity tour to some business ventures, because Cooper Hoffman, whose character's name is Gary Valentine, his mother was his agent, and then they turned that into like a small-scale advertising business where they have like 3 or 4 clients, including the first Japanese restaurant in the Encino Valley area. And he gets into different business. So like he's walking down the street and he sees a waterbed. And it's like waterbeds, and so they sell waterbeds for a while, and then eventually he opens a pinball arcade, which was illegal in parts of California until the 1970s, which always struck me as kind of weird.
Yeah,
there's this idea that pinball machines attracted a undesirable element.
Yeah,
but he is, he's got that acting connection, so he rubs up against fictionalized versions of real people, including a scene that has a Bill Holden character played by Sean Penn, who looks remarkably like Bill Holden, and Tom Waits playing a Sam Peckinpah type director. They get together and they're a little inebriated.
Yeah.
And they're like, you can run this motorcycle over this ball of fire that we'll build on the golf course. And there's a Lucille Ball character. And then there's Bradley Cooper plays John. They actually call him John Peters, who is an actual agent who was a bit of a character and quite the womanizer. It's just fun, and it's a coming of age picture. It's sweet. It's poignant. It's deceptively sweet, I think, and it's got a nice arc to it.
Deceptively sweet would probably be welcome considering Phantom Thread.
Yeah. But basically, the arc is the first moment he sees her through their first kiss.
Okay.
And there has been some comment that, he's 15, she's 25. But people seem to have less of a problem with it when it's
the other way around.
Older. Yeah. But anyway, and that also helps place it in the time. The 1973 wasn't very PC.
Yeah.
All right, so some of the other categories we had talked about. You had said worst films.
Oh, I didn't. I didn't. Oh, I can tell you what my worst film of the year was.
Oh, okay.
Blood Red Sky.
Blood Red Sky. I've not seen that.
Which is a Netflix film. I texted you about it around Halloween. Mm-hmm. Let me pull it up. My wife made me watch this. I gave her control over the TV, and she turned it on. This is directed by someone named Peter Thorwart.
Does it deliver on the promise of the title? That's what I want to know. Is there a shot of a blood red sky?
No. Peter Thorwart was a writer on Bang Boom Bang. Yeah, he doesn't have a lot of significant credits. It stars Perry Baumeister, Carl Anton Koch, Alexander Shearer. Anyways,
bunch of people you don't know about.
Dominic Purcell, you might recognize.
I recognize the name.
Yeah, it's basically a vampire on an airplane on a transatlantic flight with her non-vampire child. Well, while the plane is being hijacked by terrorists.
Of which the vampire is not a terrorist. The vampire just happens to be on that flight.
Yes. Yes. And is attempting to use her vampire powers at one point to fight off the terrorists. Yeah, it's not good.
Not since Snakes on a Plane.
I think Snakes on a Plane likely would be better than this. So.
All right. Well, my worst films of the year, Coming to America, the sequel to Coming to America, which only this one has a 2 instead of the word 2. I wasn't a huge fan of the original film. I did rewatch it. For what it is, I think the original film is quite solid. this is not this. It's bad.
Yeah.
It just feels forced, and I always felt that part of the Prince, Eddie Murphy wanted to play like this idealized version of himself. That's such a great and good person, and I felt it was a little heavy on that. Just not a good movie. Godzilla vs. Kong. Well, much better than.
Well,
Godzilla,
it was
King of the Monsters.
King of the Monsters is a bad
still
one.
not
versus
good.
Kong was better. Yeah.
Witnesses is a Mormon movie about the 3 witnesses to the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
There's too much story in this film. I mean, each of these people could be a movie, and it's just not well cast. There's just not good actors.
Yeah.
Like, the acting is bad.
Yeah.
And I usually have a bit of a soft spot for this genre. I thought it was unusually bad, even though it did go into certain nuances that I don't think even 5 years ago you'd have put into a film about these people. And then lastly is not bad, but maybe disappointing, is Black Widow, which just didn't seem like it really needed to. Like, I get, like, Scarlett Johansson, that's been a great role for her, and I get wanted to give...
There was aspects of it that I liked.
Give her own thing, but, like, the story... Like, I always felt like I knew everything, and I didn't think that the villain was very good, and I didn't think it really added much, and especially since we know what happens to that character in the end, that takes so much of the... there's no suspense, because we know Black Widow is going to be fine for now, until she's not fine. I liked that Florence Pugh got introduced into it. And some of the family moments were kind of amusing, but... And the opening sequence was good, where they were basically the Americans in Ohio in the 90s, but there wasn't really substance here. You asked me about favorite movies we watched on the podcast.
Okay. I didn't rank any. I forgot to rank those.
Put The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Probably my favorite film.
That's a very strong one.
Especially that I had not seen before. Network, of course.
Yeah.
Tree of Life. And The Little Things.
Yeah. I forgot to rank those ones. The only other one that stands out to me, apart from your list, would be Remember the Night.
Wow.
That one was quite endearing to me.
Yeah.
I liked that one.
And then, of course, needless to say, the worst movie we watched on the podcast this last year was Mixed Nuts.
I have the unenviable honor of having picked the 2 worst movies that we reviewed on the podcast this year with Mixed Nuts and Critters Attack.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so...
I almost forgot about that.
Don't worry, I'll remind you. Yeah.
I did also do just a brief list of films. Actually, it's a top 10 of films that I saw in 2021 for the first time that were not from 2021. I'll just talk about them briefly. Wildfire from 2019. It's directed by Paul Dano. Co-written by him and his wife, the actress Zoe. Not his wife, but his longtime girlfriend, the actress Zoe Kazan. I think it's based on a novella or a short story, and it's about a young man in Montana in the 1950s. His parents are Carey Mulligan and Jake Gyllenhaal. They have a difficult relationship. His father's a firefighter and kind of a dreamer that's not good about keeping jobs, and the mother is just so frustrated. And this poor kid is just trying to keep the peace, and he's trying to keep this marriage together, but it can't be saved. And that is really quite good. A couple Paul Schrader films I had not seen before. After we watched The Exorcist, I went through the other Exorcist movies, and they're bad. With the exception of Exorcist 5, which is actually a prequel called Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, which is about Father Merrin in Africa just after the Second World War. This film feels like it's part of the same universe, which isn't true of some of the other ones. It feels thematically true to the other ones. The guy who wrote the film wrote a sequel and directed the sequel, Exorcist 3, and it felt like that guy didn't understand his own work as well as Paul Schrader did. We may end up watching this next Halloween. So I really like that. I also liked Hardcore from 1979 with George C. Scott. Is he's Dutch Reformed, Michigan, late 70s. They're very, very into the church. His wife. It's at first not clear if she has passed away or what happened to her, but the wife's not in the picture. He has one daughter who travels with a church group to Southern California, and they go to like Six Flags or something, and she just kind of disappears. And he hires Ray's father from Everybody Loves Raymond.
Okay.
Is a kind of a sleazy detective to try to find her, and he does, and then eventually calls him and says, "Hey, I have some stuff. I'm here in Michigan. I need to meet with you." So, well, can't you just tell me over the phone? So, no, I can't tell you over the phone. It's like, I travel here for a reason. So they rent some theater space and shows him a film, and it's like, "Is that your daughter?" And it's a pornographic film with his daughter in it. And so he heads back to California to try to find her, and he kind of presents himself as a businessman trying to get into the industry. And this was a period in which laws about this kind of thing were not fully settled, a little bit like medical marijuana or legal marijuana in Colorado, where it's like, yeah, technically legal, but it's also parts of it may not be legal. It's really good. It's a great Paul Schrader film. Whit Stillman is a director I discovered this year. I'd wanted to see Barcelona for a long time. It's from 1994. It's about two cousins spending time together in Barcelona. One works for an American company there, and the other is in the Navy. And he's gone to Barcelona to do advance work for a visit of the American fleet. And it's about the way they kind of jostle each other, and the search for love, and a little bit about the political situation in Spain in 1982. It's quite charming. Then Metropolitan, which was Stillman's first film from 1990. It is about the elites, the very waspy elites. This guy's kind of like a waspy Woody Allen, very dry. And so there's a lot of kind of references that are very kind of in-group references, like the East Side versus the West Side, and what side looks down on what side of the island. And there's this debutante ball they have every 2 years called the International, which is for non-New York-based debutantes to make their New York debut. And at least in the late 80s, early 90s, it was broadcast on television. And so the rich kids that can't get tickets sit around and watch it as spectator sport, like we would watch a football game.
Yeah.
And it's like he has an affection for this class that he's from, but he also sees their foibles. And it's just a fun film. Ragtime, Milos Forman, who did Amadeus and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This is an adaptation of the E.L. Doctorow novel about Teddy Roosevelt-era America. It's a great panorama. There's so many storylines in the novel, which I now want to read, that Forman just picked like 2 or 3 that he was most interested in. But I'd like to see this expanded into like an HBO miniseries. And just like there's certain little scenes like, well, why is Harry Houdini here? It's like I'm sure there's a whole Harry Houdini storyline that they didn't have time to get into, so he just makes a very brief appearance. I quite like that. Paul Thomas Anderson, Boogie Nights I saw for the first time, which is, I feel weird saying this is my second film about the 1970s porn scene that made my list. It's just about how soul-sucking that was. It was about people in that industry and, how horrible it is and what it does to the soul. And then he made a film, and his film debut, 1996, Heart Eight, which is another film about an older gambler who takes a troubled younger man under his wing. And I'm like, well, I've already seen this year. It's like, oh, this is a completely different take on that, and it's just as good. Here's one that I know you saw this year, Awakenings from 1990, based
good film.
On a true story. Stars Robin Williams as a doctor in New York in the 1960s who comes up with a means of taking these people that have been largely vegetative, sometimes since the 1920s. I forget the condition they had, but is able to wake them up. It doesn't prove to be a full fix. They're back in their earlier state in a matter of months. The medication
only works for a limited period of time.
But it's just a beautiful movie, and it's Robin Williams under a tight leash, kind of reined in, which he's quite good.
Robin Williams reined in a dramatic role is always affecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful movie that I've been wanting to see for decades, and I finally got around to it. The original taking of Pelham 123 from 1974, super solid effective, film. 1970s kind of caper film. I love the period. I love the genre. I love Walter Matthau in it. I just think it totally worked. Unlike the more recent, I want to say 2009 remake that was just had one or two interesting ideas in it, and at least wasn't trying to be a shot-for-shot remake, but it's just nowhere near as effective.
Yeah.
And an honorable mention goes to Starship Troopers,
Yeah.
which is kind of subversive.
Yeah.
It's a propaganda film from a future world that doesn't exist.
Next, I wanted to touch briefly on podcasts. I'm going to give my top 5 podcasts of the year in no particular order, except for the honorable mention, which the honorable mention goes to Do You Know Mordecai?
I do not.
Which is about a man who went by the name Mordecai and was basically a scam artist, scamming mostly women women and their families out of money, basically scamming multiple women at a time, pretending to be a financial investor, and so on and so forth. One of the best true crime podcasts of 2021, which surprisingly was not a good year for true crime podcasts. Next on my list, again, the top 5 are in no particular order, was a subset of Reveal. It was a series of that podcast called Mississippi Goddamn, which takes its name from a song, but it's about the killing of a black teenager in Mississippi, or let me rephrase that, the death of a teenager in Mississippi during a traffic stop. The cause of death is still disputed to this day, but as is necessary to put this situation into context, it deals with issues with policing amongst people of race in the South.
When did this story happen?
I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I want to say 2009.
Okay.
So, much more recent. The official story is that he shot himself in the mouth with a shotgun, which is difficult to do.
At an intersection during a traffic stop?
Yes. Shortly after having left his girlfriend's house.
Like on purpose?
To commit suicide.
And cops were there?
Yes.
It's fishy.
Yeah. Anyways, the next one I will rank is The Line, which is from Dan Taberski, which when we did my top 5 podcast earlier this year, he made an appearance in that with the Running from Cops series. This was different. This is not under the Headlong banner. This is a standalone podcast, which was also produced at the same time as a docu-series that's on Apple TV Plus by the same name, where these guys shared all of their research while making shows in different formats. So Dan Taberski made his podcast about this, and the producers of the docu-series made their docu-series while sharing research. It's about the U.S. Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher, who was convicted of war crimes and was pardoned and had fought those, and in separate interviews, both with the producers of the docu-series as well as with Dan Taberski, admits to the crimes of which he's accused of, just in a slightly different format than he had originally been confused. Next on my list is I'm Not a Monster, which was about a American lady who married a Muslim, and then they go to Iraq, and her husband is joins ISIS and is involved in terrorist attacks. And they're just kind of stuck along. This child is the one that was featured in videos that were shown on the news here in the U.S. extensively, where he's disassembling AK-47s, showing how to use them, and threatening to blow up U.S. soldiers. But he was a young child at the time of these videos. He was like 7 or 8. But it's, talking about the mom, why she took him to Iraq willingly, these types of things. But yeah, I'm Not a Monster was good. They have interviews both with the child, who is now back in the U.S., has undergone heavy counseling, to try and renormalize. The mother is actually serving a prison sentence for her involvement with her husband and ISIS. So, next one on my list is Believe Her. Have you ever heard the term criminalized survival?
I don't know.
So this podcast delves into the story of a young woman who was being abused by her boyfriend and then husband, both sexually, physically, emotionally, mentally, repeatedly abused, and she went through the process of documenting it some. This took place in New York. New York has laws where you can go to specific places and have like rapes documented without involving the police.
Okay.
But at least then it's documented if at some future point you decide to involve law enforcement.
Okay.
Law enforcement, at one point in time prior to her murdering her husband or killing her husband, considered her a victim and was looking into, because her husband was posting these pornographic images of her as he was basically forcing himself upon her, posting them online on amateur pornography sites. And she had brought it up to her therapist, who then mandatory reporting laws had to report it to law enforcement, who investigated it, considered her a victim. But after she kills her husband, it wasn't convenient to charging her with murder, so they no longer considered her a victim and never even turned over the evidence of their previous investigations to the defense. So it's criminalized survival is, you've heard of battered women syndrome,
Yeah.
and that's a legal defense in court as well. But it's largely about people who could be, they could be using battered women's syndrome as a defense, but it's not convenient to the defense or to the state's charging of them. And so they call it criminalized survival because they're having survived by virtue of not becoming the victim of the murder. They're not the perfect victim. Therefore, it's not convenient to treat them, in those terms. And so this woman in particular was sentenced to 30 years in prison for killing her husband. They convicted her of first-degree murder. The sentence has since been modified by the courts, who acknowledged basically that they failed to take these things into account. New York has a law basically about criminalized survival that caps how long you can spend in prison. And so basically lowered her sentence to something in line with manslaughter, because she didn't kill her husband when he was actively abusing her. She'd been making threats earlier in the day, and then while he slept, she took his gun and shot and killed him. So they reduced her sentence to something in line with something like manslaughter. So she will get out of prison while her kids are still teenagers and be able to be with them again. But it's about believing, especially women, in these scenarios and believing them when these types of things happen. So, and then the last one I want to mention, surprising somewhat to a certain extent, it's another Dan Taberski podcast.
Okay.
Which, if you've listened to our previous podcast, is kind of becoming a theme for me. But this was a 9/11 podcast, not told as a 9/11 podcast. So the podcast itself is called 9/12, and it focuses on the America that we saw on September 12th in the aftermath of 9/11. It doesn't delve a lot. I mean, it deals with 9/11 because how can you not? It was released around the 20th anniversary this year, or this past year. We're actually recording this in January 2022. But it talks largely about other things that happened. Like it talks about, for a while, comedy wasn't really okay in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And he even talks to, I guess around that time, The Onion had moved to New York. It's moved its headquarters to New York and was shifting from a student paper to a for-profit newspaper or for-profit entity. And their first launch was supposed to be on September 12th, their first issue. And they obviously delayed that and put it on hold indefinitely. And it was like, how do we get back to the type of satire that we're known for in the aftermath of 9/11, including the debate of whether to include a headline at one point that said, "America is still strong," says Quadragon officials. But it was a surprisingly well done podcast. The conclusion is that, that never forget mindset is not about the country we were on September 12th, but more about the people who want to forget who we were on September 12th and just never forget the anger of September 11th. And in the era of the Forever Wars, that largely became true.
Yeah.
So
it reminds me of that first Saturday Night Live. After 9/11, they had Rudy Giuliani and firefighters on for a thing at the beginning. And then Lauren Michaels says, "Is it okay if we're funny now?" And Giuliani says, "Well, why start now?"
Yeah. So those are my top 5 podcasts of 2021. The only other honorable mention I will throw out there was the most recent season of Undisclosed. It was possibly their best season so far. So, yeah. Next, into books.
You do books first.
Okay. I wanted to hit on, I only have 2 books that I was going to discuss. The first was the best book that I read that was released in 2021. And it's going to be Empire of Pain, which was written by Patrick Radden-Keefe, which delves into the Sackler family and the Purdue Pharma, and all that type of stuff. Very well researched, very well written. Calling it a current topic doesn't seem entirely accurate, but it's very, that court case is still in the process of wrapping up and controversial right now, especially considering some of the stuff that came to light through his book, where the Sacklers for so long had been pulling money out of Purdue Pharma and stashing it around and hiding it. The fact that they were able to reach the settlement they were when they had extracted so much money from that company, to a lot of people didn't seem fair, and a judge recently actually threw out the settlement basically for that same reason, which the Sackler family is in the process of appealing to try and reinstate that settlement. So, yeah. The other one I was going to mention was the best book that I read in 2021, which was Robert Edsels' The Monuments Men. Not the shortened version. There is a shortened version. This was the full book, The Monuments Men, which was extremely long. Took me a while to finish. There's times when it's dry just because of the amount of detail he went into, but it's a tremendous book that I would recommend to anyone.
And of course, it was the basis for the movie.
The movie is actually based on the shortened version.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Dude. Well, I threw together some book things. I kept a complete list this year, actually.
Yeah.
But there's just a handful I want to just touch on briefly. I think these are just things that I read this year. So I tended to do a lot of kind of couplings, like reading books on similar topics. So I read a book called The Teapot Dome Scandal, How Big Oil Bought the Harding White House and Tried to Steal the Country by Leighton McCartney. This came out 2009-ish. Story about the Teapot Dome Scandal, about the Interior Department under the Harding administration leasing public oil lands for private use and various officials pocketing money in so doing. And then I read a book called The Inside Story of the Harding Tragedy by Harry Daugherty, the disgraced attorney general who was involved in the Teapot Dome scandal and never went to prison. He had like 2 hung juries. And so one of the reasons I was particularly interested in reading this is to see the spin. Because I think we're going to be seeing a lot of political memoirs in the near future where people are going to be spinning extra hard.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was interesting. Of course, in Harry Daugherty's story, Harry Daugherty is a good man. And Harding was a good man, safely dead at this point. It was the underlings. Not me, not my underling, but other underlings that were guilty there. So it was interesting, especially to read the full story first. It was fresh in my mind so that I could see where he was obfuscating. Frank J. Cannon was the son of George Q. Cannon, a member of the LDS First Presidency and one of Utah's first 2 United States senators, who later had a very serious falling out with the church. He's quite a colorful character. I ran across him like 2007, 2008, and I actually thought, this is an interesting guy. He's so flawed. I had thought about maybe writing a biography because the article I read about him, I wanted more, and the guy that wrote the article never finished the biography, apparently, that he was going to write on. But finally, biography came out. Frank J. Cannon, a senator, Saint, Senator, and Scoundrel by Val Holy. It's quite good. On an earlier podcast, I shared a little story about him and his little affair he had, and how the woman that he had an affair with ended up becoming his step-cousin, something like that, because they had to kind of get rid of her. And then a book that Cannon wrote called Under the Prophet in Utah, they wrote in the 19-teens, has kind of an expose that also had a ghost writer. 2 books that I read this year. One came out last year. One came out this year by the same author, Lindsay Ellis, who, until a few days ago, she announced her retirement from YouTubing. was a video essayist whose work is on YouTube and who I've been watching for about a decade. And she wrote a series of novels. It's an alternate history about kind of a first contact situation in 2007, so George W. Bush and the Iraq War, and the main character's father is a Julian Assange type figure. It is, I think, there's going to be 4 books total, and what it appears to be, and Lindsay Ellis has done a lot of her video essaying on the idea of young adult fiction, kind of like a corrective to it, kind of like the anti-YA fiction, because this character is a wreck, this lead character. I like the weird alternate history nostalgia of it. We end up with President Cheney. It's kind of interesting to see how things develop. I quite like them. They've gone in interesting directions. And then the last book I wanted to mention came out, I believe, last year. His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life by Jonathan Alter. This one, I listened to as an audiobook. It is very long. It's a bit of an apologia for the Carter presidency. Basically, an unusually good human being, a very talented person who was largely the victim of the time in which he held the office.
Yeah.
That they just kind of a lose-lose, especially those last 2 years, were just an absolute disaster. But, he gave his very best, and there was a lot to admire in that presidency, even though it's come to be defined as a failure. Jimmy Carter himself has come to be defined as the greatest former president in the history of the United States with what he's done since leaving office.
Yeah, indeed. Do you recall how many books total you read this year?
Like 29, something like that.
I only know because of Goodreads. And granted, a lot of the books I read are in podcast format, but I finished 65 books this year.
Wow.
Yeah. And a lot of them were shorter and like parts of fictional series that I've read before. So, yeah. Not that I've read those books before, but I've already been reading in this series. Yeah. So. Fun stuff. Interesting year.
Yeah, interesting year. It'll be interesting to see.
Ended on kind of a low note between Omicron and the death of Betty White.
Yeah.
But
well, hopefully 2022 won't be 2022.
Indeed.
Hopefully it'll be better.
A new year. Well, if that's it, I'm Rob.
I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. Yeah,
long, rambling, pain in the A to edit podcast.
Other movies I saw this year, Black Widow, you mentioned. Finch. Wasn't even an honorable mention for me, but it was close. If I'd done honorable mentions, it probably would have been there. Raya and the Last Dragon probably could have been an honorable mention.
It's also why Lindsay Ellis had to retire, because of backlash over some of the things she said about that movie.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Luca.
Yeah.
That was fun. Cry Macho, obviously. Mortal Kombat. Not great.
Mortal Kombat made your honorable mentions?
No, I'm just listing movies I saw.
Okay.
Woman in the Window. Not great. Without Remorse, which was... A lot of the movies that I saw this year were... So.
Are you glad you saw it?
What, Without Remorse? Sure.
So you're without remorse about seeing Without Remorse?
No, I'm not without remorse.
Oh, okay.
It was not great. Of the big name director streaming releases this year...
Who directed this?
Who directed Without Remorse? That's the Michael B. Jordan one.
Oh, okay.
Based on the Tom Clancy.
Oh, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was a Prime release.
All right.
Directed by Stefano Sollima.
Stefano?
Who did 000 and Gamora, Sicario, The Day of the...
Jackal? The Day of the
It's
Robot?
Sicario 2. Day of the Soldado.
I like Sicario 1. I never saw Sicario 2.
Yeah, nothing else that you'd really be aware of. Yeah, not great. It was one of the weaker direct-to-streamings this year. The Tomorrow War was actually one of the better ones.
I thought about watching it, and then when I looked into it, I'm like, this movie, I'm not going to like it.
I would say watch it. You might be surprised. It took I did not expect the direction it went, and I was actually pleased with it. I rated it 7 out of 10 stars.
Okay.
Lockdown, which was on HBO Max. It's a Warner Brothers, COVID thing. It was released early in the year. It was okay. Mm-hmm. Slumber Party Massacre. Haven't quite finished it yet. I'm suspecting it's going to be in the 5-star range.
This is the remake of something.
Yes, the 2021. So, I think I'm missing one, which was wasn't that Angelina Jolie Fire one this year?
Can't remember. I think that was a year or two back.
Those Who Wish Me Dead. No, that was 2021.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Yeah. Not great.
Mm-hmm.
It was okay. If you can accept them ignoring the laws of physics related to fire.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Anyways, yeah, I didn't catch a lot of 2021 releases this year. And like I said, most of them were direct to streaming between having a puppy and just not wanting any more COVID risk than we already had, given the nature of our job. So, yeah. Would you say movie theaters were perhaps your biggest COVID risk this year?
Yeah, probably. But, there's so few people in them, generally.
Yeah, still.
Yeah, still. So I wonder the next time I'll be in a crowded theater, which has its virtues. There's some movies that I want to see in a crowded theater.
When we went to see A Quiet Place 2, there was only like 3 empty seats.
Mm.
It was in one of the small theaters, but there was only 3 empty seats.
I think I've seen 2 or 3 movies I saw this year. It was just me.
Yeah. Fun stuff. Yeah, we had far more exposure vectors, so we were being cautious and more cautious in other areas. But otherwise, I think we probably would have seen more movies. But yeah.
Mm. So we're here at Rob's friend's house, and he's been dog sitting. And so I have to ask, before you put them to bed at night, do you sing them Joy to the World or Mama Told Me Not to Come?
No.
Those are songs by Three Dog Night.
Wow. Congratulations.
Indeed.
Yeah, you've educated me.
She hasn't left any dollops of Daisy around here lately. So.
Yes, she has.
Oh, she has. Okay.
Which is why I was nervous when you said something like that. You know what? I'm going to just start this recording over. Actually, should I let it go?
I don't know.
Will
when we start recording, we should probably acknowledge the presence of the dogs.
Yes. Because I'm sure that they will be heard regardless. Sorry. Pardon the interruption. We're trying to record here. Thank you.